The grand ballroom of Hawthorne Manor glittered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each prism catching the flickering light of 1,000 candles and scattering it like captured stars across the polished marble floor. The orchestra's gentle strains filled the room with delicate waltzes, yet beneath the glittering decorum, a subtle tension thrummed, an almost imperceptible hum of anticipation, of whispered judgments, of eyes measuring and evaluating. It was in this delicate web of propriety and expectation that Eleanor Hawthorne, newlywed yet already an outsider, stood like a fragile bloom pressed against the cold glass of aristocratic scrutiny. Eleanor, daughter of a modest rector, bore the gentle elegance of someone used to opulence yet instinctively at home in grace. Her gown, a delicate shade of ivory with understated lace embroidery, hinted at refinement without pretension. But it was her eyes that betrayed her, wide, luminous, and uncertain, yet tempered with a quiet resolve that refused to be diminished by the haughty gazes sweeping across her. She held her posture with measured dignity, yet the subtle tremor of her fingers betrayed a heart caught between hope and fear. Duke Alexander Hawthorne, tall and commanding even in the subtle restraint of formal attire, stood beside her like a sentinel of conflicted emotions. His dark eyes, usually the epitome of composure and command, flickered with a tension no courtly mask could fully conceal. The Duke's hand rested lightly upon Eleanor's back, not in possession, but in a tentative act of protection, a quiet rebellion against the weight of his family's expectations. He could not fully reconcile the love he felt with the rigid codes of the ton, yet the mere presence of Eleanor in that ballroom, delicate and resolute, stirred in him an ache he could not name aloud. The murmurs began quietly, almost like a distant wind brushing the edges of a fragile veil. Lady Margaret, Alexander's aunt, a woman whose sharpness had long been feared within the Hawthorne walls, leaned subtly toward a neighboring guest. "A most curious match, would you not agree?" she murmured, though her voice carried easily enough to be heard by those nearest. "I cannot fathom what might have possessed the Duke to unite himself with one so modest." The words, though cloaked in civility, landed on Eleanor like a cold draught, and she felt the sharp prickle of awareness that her every movement was being weighed, her every gesture examined for proof of inadequacy. She adjusted the delicate lace at her neckline, a motion as much for herself as for those observing. She did not shrink, she did not falter, and yet the weight of generations of expectation pressed upon her chest like an invisible hand, reminding her that she was, in the eyes of many, a temporary intrusion upon a lineage of power and tradition. Alexander, sensing the subtle attack on Eleanor's dignity, shifted slightly, his jaw tightening. He longed to voice the indignation that burned in his chest, to sweep aside the whispers and declare his love openly. Yet the rigid protocols of his station, the unspoken demands of his family, bound him. A gentle sigh passed his lips, one unnoticed by the majority, but not by Eleanor, who felt it resonate with an unspoken understanding. They were together, yet apart, bound in love but separated by circumstance. The orchestra swelled as a new waltz began, and Alexander extended his hand with a formality that belied the turmoil in his gaze. Eleanor placed her delicate hand in his, a spark of connection bridging the gulf between social expectation and personal desire. They moved with practiced grace, bodies aligned in the dance, yet minds adrift in the silent conversation of longing and restraint. Every step was measured, every turn precise, but within the confines of the ballroom, a world of emotion unfolded that none could perceive but themselves. From the edges of the room, Lady Margaret's eyes glimmered with triumph, a subtle curl of disdain at the corner of her lips. "It is but a matter of weeks before reality shall demand its toll," she whispered to her companion, whose expression mirrored her certainty. "The Duke may have a heart, yet he cannot escape the expectations of his name. The Hawthorne legacy will not bend for sentiment." Eleanor felt the sting of the words, yet she refused the collapse of spirit. Her upbringing, modest though it had been, had taught her dignity in adversity. She allowed herself a quiet lift of the chin, a gesture of subtle defiance, even as her heart constricted. In the flickering candlelight, Alexander caught the brief shadow of sorrow and pride crossing her features. In that moment, the decision of the world seemed almost palpable, a delicate balance between societal obligation and the fierce, unspoken love that pulsed between them. As the evening progressed, the whispers only grew more pointed. Eleanor sensed the scrutiny in every nod, in every sidelong glance. Even well-meaning acquaintances, uncertain of her place, offered compliments that rang hollow, polite shields for judgments unspoken. She held her composure with the skill of someone trained in quiet endurance. Yet within her, the fragile hope of acceptance and belonging flickered like a candle in a draught. Alexander, meanwhile, found his patience tested by the relentless pressure of the assembly. The Duke's family, though outwardly cordial, employed every subtle tactic to undermine Eleanor's presence. Their disapproval was a silent chorus, each glance and gesture designed to communicate that she did not belong. The knowledge that he could not openly defend her, that even his affection could not shield her entirely, weighed heavily upon him. And yet, he did not retreat. Even amid the cruel murmurs, he remained at her side, a steadfast presence in a world eager to push her away. 2 weeks passed with the relentless scrutiny of society as Eleanor and Alexander navigated the treacherous waters of expectation. Behind closed doors, they shared moments of whispered conversation, stolen glances, and quiet reassurance. The love that bound them was undeniable, yet the weight of lineage, protocol, and family insistence grew heavier with each passing day. The final evening of that fortnight arrived with a grim inevitability. In a chamber lined with portraits of stern ancestors, Alexander's father presented the papers with a tone of quiet finality, sealing Eleanor's banishment from the estate. Eleanor's heart ached, yet she received the decree with measured composure. Not a tremor betrayed the grief that churned beneath her calm exterior. Alexander's hand lingered over hers a moment longer than propriety allowed, a silent promise that the bonds of affection, though forcibly severed by law and expectation, were not easily undone. Their eyes met, and within the depth of that gaze, volumes of unspoken words passed, pleas, regrets, and the quiet assertion that love, though restrained, would endure. As she departed the estate, escorted by discreet servants through the shadowed corridors and into the awaiting carriage, Eleanor allowed herself a single, deep breath, inhaling the crisp night air of freedom tempered by sorrow. Alexander remained at the doorway, his silhouette framed by candlelight, immobile, a figure torn between duty and desire. Neither spoke. Words would have been inadequate, their meaning lost amidst the rigid structures that governed their lives. The carriage rolled away, and the sound of its wheels on the gravel seemed to mark the finality of a chapter neither wished to close. Yet within the quiet chambers of Hawthorne Manor, a seed of defiance had been planted, an unyielding awareness that though society demanded separation, the heart's claims were immutable. Eleanor, carrying the weight of her own dignity and the fragile hope of what might come, disappeared into the night, leaving behind a Duke frozen in the doorway, a man suddenly aware that some losses cannot be measured by rank, wealth, or propriety alone. And in that suspended, fleeting moment, the story of their love, tested by social chains, whispered judgment, and familial expectation, was only beginning. The countryside welcomed Eleanor with a quiet embrace, a world far removed from the glittering scrutiny of Hawthorne Manor. Rolling fields stretched under the soft caress of morning mist, and the scent of dew-laden grass mingled with the faint perfume of wildflowers that skirted the lanes. In the simple parish cottage that now sheltered her, Eleanor discovered a fragile sanctuary, a place where her dignity could survive untainted by the relentless judgment of nobility. She arranged her sparse belongings with meticulous care, each item a small act of defiance against the chaos imposed by the Duke's family. The villagers, curious yet gentle, observed her with a mixture of admiration and cautious reverence. They knew the tale of her abrupt banishment, whispered from neighbor to neighbor with a blend of pity and awe. Eleanor, with her calm composure and quiet strength, commanded respect without the need for grand declarations. She moved through the days with deliberate purpose, tending the small garden behind the cottage and assisting in the parish school, her hands busy while her heart harbored the silent ache of loss. Yet even amid the simplicity of rural life, Eleanor could not entirely escape the shadows of her past. The letters she received, carefully concealed within modest envelopes by a discreet messenger, were rare and brief, tokens of a connection that endured despite distance. One such missive arrived on a crisp morning, sealed with the hawthorn crest, and Eleanor's fingers trembled as she broke the wax. Inside lay a delicate locket, a miniature portrait of Alexander framed in gold, accompanied by a single line written in his familiar hand. "Though the world may separate us, my heart remains your faithful companion." The gesture, small yet profound, rekindled a warmth Eleanor had struggled to protect from despair. She pressed the locket to her chest, feeling a pulse of love that defied time, distance, and the rigid dictates of society. Though she would not admit it aloud, each heartbeat carried the memory of Alexander's gaze, the fleeting warmth of his hand, and the promise of a love that had not been extinguished. Alexander, meanwhile, continued to navigate the suffocating corridors of London society. The weight of his family's expectations pressed relentlessly upon him, a constant reminder that the Duke's title demanded alliances, appearances, and obedience. He attended balls and gatherings with a composed smile, yet behind the mask, his thoughts wandered ceaselessly to Eleanor. The image of her standing in the grand ballroom, delicate and steadfast, haunted his every waking moment. Each whispered comment of disapproval, each glance of derision from his peers, deepened the ache in his chest. Rumors circulated like wildfire among the ton, igniting whispers in drawing rooms and carriage interiors alike. Society speculated upon the cause of the Duke's sudden annulment, questioning why a man of his status would forsake such an elegant match. Lady Margaret's barbed insinuations had spread like frost over the social climate, chilling conversations and leaving Eleanor's name subject to quiet derision. Alexander's frustration grew not merely for himself, but for the woman he loved, whose dignity had been challenged at every turn. He longed to defend her, yet every defense would have brought scandal, and scandal threatened the very lineage he was sworn to protect. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed in quiet solitude, the knowledge of life growing within her both a comfort and a source of trepidation. Each flutter, each subtle movement of her unborn child reminded her of the bond she shared with Alexander, of a love that endured despite the world's insistence upon separation. She confided in no one, yet the villagers, attuned to her quiet strength, provided support without intrusion. The midwife, a woman of practical wisdom, observed Eleanor's steadfast composure with admiration. "You carry more than a child," she remarked one evening as candlelight flickered across the small cottage. "You carry hope itself." Meanwhile, Alexander wrestled with the paradox of duty and desire. He attended meetings of the estate's trustees, dinners with potential political allies, and soirees where alliances were brokered over fine wines and whispered agreements. Yet in the quietest hours, alone in his chambers, he held the miniature locket Eleanor had once sent, turning it over in his hand and imagining her there beside him. His love, once restrained by propriety, now surged quietly, a relentless tide that refused to be subdued. The contrast between the obligations of his title and the yearning of his heart gnawed at him ceaselessly, each passing day amplifying the urgency to act, though circumstance rendered any action impossible. Back in the countryside, Eleanor prepared for the inevitable changes her condition would bring. She arranged a cradle near the hearth, imagining the infant who would one day bind her to Alexander in a way no annulment could undo. She spoke quietly to the child within her, murmuring words of hope and promise, shaping a bond that transcended distance. Each whisper was a declaration of love, an unspoken vow to endure, to survive, and to protect the legacy of their union. The locket Alexander had sent became a symbol of resilience for Eleanor. She wore it beneath her gown, close to her heart, feeling the presence of the Duke in every pulse, every quiet beat. It was a reminder that even though society had sought to divide them, the connection they shared remained inviolate. And though she moved through her days with a composed exterior, her inner world was alive with anticipation and unspoken longing, a tapestry of memory and hope intricately woven with the threads of her love. One afternoon, as Eleanor walked along the narrow lane that led from her cottage to the small village chapel, she encountered a child from the parish, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. The girl extended the flowers with a shy smile. "For you, madam," she said, "for bringing care and light to our school." Eleanor accepted them, a warmth blooming in her chest, realizing that even in exile, she had the power to nurture life and love beyond her own circumstances. It was a subtle triumph, yet one that reinforced the quiet strength she would need in the months to come. In London, Alexander's frustration reached a quiet apex. He had arranged discreet inquiries, sending servants and confidants to trace Eleanor's whereabouts. Yet the world of society was vast, and the countryside proved elusive. Each report brought him closer, yet still distant, a maddening interplay of hope and helplessness. The awareness that Eleanor carried his child, the future of the Hawthorne line entwined with their secret union, intensified the tension that pressed upon him from all sides. The final days of Eleanor's pregnancy approached with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She prepared her small home meticulously, ensuring every detail of comfort and safety for the arrival of the child who would embody their love. Alexander, unaware of the precise moment of this new life, continued to navigate social obligations with increasing unrest, the locket always near, a tether to a heart across the miles. And in the quiet hours of a twilight-streaked evening, Eleanor sat by the window, gazing at the horizon where the soft light of sunset kissed the fields. She clutched the locket, feeling Alexander's presence in spirit, if non-person. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the faint promise of change, of reunion, of a love neither annulment nor social decree could extinguish. The world beyond the hills was vast and uncertain. Yet within the small cottage, the seed of hope flourished, nourished by courage, resilience, and the enduring pulse of affection that connected two hearts across distance and circumstance. The stage was set, delicate yet unyielding. Eleanor's child would come into the world soon, a living testament to a love that defied societal judgment. Alexander, caught between duty and longing, would continue to seek the path that might reunite them. And in this fragile, suspended moment, the story of their enduring connection, the hidden heir, and the inevitable confrontation with fate began to take shape, promising a reunion fraught with emotion, tension, and the quiet, relentless assertion of the heart's claims. The rain fell in soft, persistent sheets over the quiet village, each droplet striking the cobblestones with a gentle, rhythmic cadence, as if marking the passage of a world that moved at once too slowly and too swiftly for human hearts to follow. The sky was a muted gray, heavy with clouds, and the distant hills melted into the mist, lending the parish an air of solitude that seemed almost sacred. Eleanor sat by the window of her modest home, her hands resting lightly on the swell of her child, now a healthy infant with wide, curious eyes and a small tuft of dark hair. The firelight flickered against her face, illuminating both the quiet strength and the lingering weariness that shadowed her delicate features. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, rustling their leaves as if whispering secrets to those willing to listen. A sudden carriage, the wheels splashing through puddles, announced a visitor before the door opened. Eleanor's breath caught, her heart quickening with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The servant who had delivered messages from the Hawthorne estate now appeared at her threshold, a mixture of hesitation and urgency in his expression. "Madam," he said softly, bowing with restrained formality, "a gentleman requests your presence, or, rather, wishes to see you privately. Eleanor's pulse thrummed with a delicate tension, though she did not yet know the identity of the visitor. She rose gracefully, smoothing the fabric of her gown and stepping toward the door. A glance outside revealed a man standing under the rain, his posture rigid, his cloak damp, yet every line of his form radiated the unmistakable authority of nobility. Alexander Hawthorne, the Duke himself, was there, his gaze fixed not on the servant, not on the cottage, but on her. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to contract and stretch simultaneously. Eleanor felt an involuntary shiver run through her, and Alexander, for the first time since their enforced separation, seemed to hesitate as if frozen by the sheer force of what he saw before him. The sight of Eleanor, resilient, tender, and holding the child that bore his blood, awakened in him a torrent of emotion he had long restrained beneath layers of duty, pride, and societal expectation. He took a step forward, then paused, the rain slicking his cloak, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat, and the weight of every past choice pressing upon him. Eleanor, though composed, felt the surge of recognition, the quiet explosion of relief and longing that had been building in her heart for months. Her fingers brushed her child's cheek instinctively, as if to anchor herself against the sudden rush of vulnerability that Alexander's presence evoked. She had imagined this encounter countless times, yet no vision had ever captured the reality. The sharp, compelling magnetism of his gaze, the faint tremor in his jaw, the unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that neither distance nor decree could sever. "Eleanor," he spoke finally, his voice low, resonant, carrying the weight of all that had been suppressed. "It has been far too long." His words were simple, yet each syllable trembled with meaning, a confession of longing and regret that sought no disguise. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, the smallest of bows that conveyed both respect and the subtle strength she had cultivated. "Indeed, your grace," she replied, her tone composed, though the tremor she could not entirely suppress betrayed the depth of her emotion. "Time has been instructive." Alexander's gaze softened as he stepped closer, mindful of both the proprieties of social conduct and the urgent need to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. He cast a tentative glance at the child, who now looked up at him with innocent curiosity, unaware of the tumult of emotion that their presence had awakened. "Is this mine?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, yet charged with a gravity that made Eleanor's heart ache. "Yes," she replied, her tone steady, though a flicker of pride and defiance danced in her eyes. "He is yours, as he has always been." She extended the infant toward him with careful hands, and Alexander, with a reverence born of awe and love, lifted the child gently, cradling him as if he were both fragile and miraculous. The warmth of the infant against his chest seemed to unlock something in Alexander, a tide of emotions long contained by expectation and decorum. His eyes met Eleanor's once more, and in that single gaze, volumes of unspoken words, regrets, and promises passed between them. The years of separation, the enforced silence, the whispered judgments of society, all faded into irrelevance against the undeniable reality of a love that bound them together. Eleanor, feeling the depth of his gaze and the gentle press of the child against his chest, felt a swell of emotion she had scarcely dared to acknowledge in solitude. The fear, the loneliness, the constant vigilance of propriety, all of it gave way to a powerful surge of relief and hope. She stepped closer, and for a fleeting moment, the space between them seemed charged with a quiet electricity, a delicate dance of restraint and yearning. Alexander's hand lifted, almost unconsciously, to brush a stray lock of hair from Eleanor's face. I cannot bear another day apart," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly with a weight of confession. "The years have been cruel in their separation, yet I have known, even in the midst of duty, that my heart belongs to you and to him. I cannot live as if you were anything but mine." Tears, held back with steadfast discipline for months, gathered in Eleanor's eyes. She swallowed, steadying her voice, yet the quiver betrayed the storm within. "And yet you came," she whispered, the simplest of statements heavy with gratitude, astonishment, and the quiet recognition of the impossible odds they had overcome. The rain continued its soft percussion outside, the world hushed as if holding its breath for this reunion. Alexander lowered his gaze to the child, tracing the delicate curve of his cheek, the tiny fingers that wrapped instinctively around his father's hand. He felt the full weight of responsibility and love converge in a single moment. The past wrongs and societal expectations rendered insignificant by the undeniable claim of blood and heart. "Let's not speak of what separates us," he murmured, looking once again at Eleanor, "but of what endures and what we must protect. You and him and the life we have begun together, however quietly, shall not be undone." Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, fragile yet luminous, and she allowed herself to place a hand upon his arm, a small but irrevocable acknowledgment of their shared destiny. The room, though modest and unadorned, felt vast with possibility, each shadow of the past eclipsed by the presence of truth, love, and the fragile miracle cradled between them. The moment lingered, suspended in the golden glow of firelight and the muted rhythm of rainfall. Words, though plentiful, seemed unnecessary, for each glance, each breath, each unspoken motion spoke with clarity. They were bound by a love neither time nor society could sever, and the child between them was the living testament of that bond. As Alexander finally straightened, his gaze lingering on Eleanor, the weight of the past year seemed to settle, not as oppression, but as a reminder of endurance and resilience. They had been tested by circumstance, judged by the world, and yet here they stood, reunited, cautious yet irrevocably drawn together, each heartbeat echoing the promise of a future that, though uncertain, would be claimed together. And in that quiet parlor, where rain met window pane and firelight danced across faces marked by longing and hope, the story of love, separation, and the unwavering claim of the heart reached a pivotal turning point. The reunion was not an end, but a beginning, a fragile, luminous bridge between past sorrow and the possibilities that lay ahead. The world beyond the windows continued its relentless march, yet within this intimate space, time slowed, and the heart's voice rang clear above all else. They had found each other again, and nothing would be quite the same. The twilight deepened into evening, casting long, honeyed shadows across the modest parlor where firelight danced upon the walls. The room, humble yet warm, seemed transformed by the quiet gravity of the moment. Alexander Hawthorne, Duke by title but lover and father by heart, stood near the hearth, holding the infant with a care that belied his commanding presence. The child's eyes, wide and bright, followed his every movement, and Alexander felt a surge of protective devotion so immediate and fierce that it threatened to overwhelm him. Eleanor, standing beside the hearth, watched him with a blend of awe and relief, her own hands lightly resting upon the infant's small shoulders. The rain outside had ceased, leaving the air fresh with the scent of damp earth and distant wildflowers. The quiet that settled over the cottage was profound, as if the world itself had paused to witness the culmination of longing, patience, and endurance. Alexander, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, took a slow, deliberate breath. The weight of the past months, the annulment, the exile, the relentless tug of societal expectation, pressed upon him, yet now, in this intimate room, it felt less a burden and more a testament to the resilience of love. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, deliberate, and steady despite the tumult of emotion coursing beneath it, "I have spent every hour since our separation with a single thought, that no decree, no title, no obligation could erase what I feel for you. The world demanded your absence, and I obeyed, but in doing so, I obeyed only outwardly. My heart, my very soul, remained yours." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, and a tear glistened at the corner of her eye, catching the firelight like a tiny, precious gem. She had expected words, perhaps, but the depth, The sincerity, the quiet insistence behind them struck her with a force she had scarcely dared to hope for. "Alexander," she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion yet carefully controlled, "we have suffered much, but these walls, this child, and this moment, surely they are proof that love cannot be bound by paper or propriety." Alexander nodded, setting the infant gently into Eleanor's arms, careful not to startle the child, but insistent in making the gesture one of trust and shared responsibility. "Indeed," he said softly, eyes never leaving hers, "and it is proof enough for me. I cannot abide another day in which I imagine your life apart from mine, or our child's life bereft of a father's care. However discreet, it must remain until the world allows what the heart already knows." The intensity of his gaze, the vulnerability carefully hidden beneath the veneer of authority, stirred in Eleanor a tide of emotions long restrained. She had borne her trials with fortitude, had nurtured hope in secret, and had endured society's whispers with quiet dignity. Now, standing before the man who had been both the source of her deepest sorrow and her greatest love, she allowed herself a fleeting surrender. The hand that rested upon the child's back lifted to touch Alexander's, a tentative, deliberate gesture that conveyed a depth of feeling words could not encapsulate. "I have never ceased to love you," she whispered, her voice a melody of sorrow, longing, and quiet triumph. "Even in exile, even amid the whispers and disapproval, my heart has remained unwavering." Alexander's hand closed over hers, warm, strong, and reverent. "And mine," he replied, his tone imbued with a gravity that seemed to still the room. "Unwavering, unyielding, and beyond all measure. You and he gestured toward the infant cradled in Eleanor's arms, "are the center of my existence. Whatever the cost, whatever the opposition, I will ensure that neither of you suffers another moment of uncertainty or shame." Eleanor felt a fragile hope unfurl within her, a delicate flower nurtured through months of hardship and solitude. She looked down at their child, whose tiny fingers curled instinctively around her own, and then back to Alexander. In his eyes, she saw not only love, but a promise, an unspoken vow to confront the challenges that society, family, and tradition might impose. His presence was at once a shield and a declaration, a testament to the enduring force of their bond. The room seemed to expand, suffused with a gentle warmth that was both literal and symbolic. Firelight played across Alexander's features, highlighting the faint shadow of worry that lingered even in this moment of reconciliation. He knelt briefly, bringing his face to the child's level, and spoke in a tender murmur, as if laying claim not through authority, but through love itself. "You are mine, as much as she is, and together we will forge a path that honors both our lineage and our hearts." Eleanor's hand rested on his shoulder, a quiet anchor amidst the surge of emotion. "We will," she affirmed softly, the strength of her conviction mirrored in the calm of her gaze. "And we shall do so with dignity, with patience, and with the certainty that love, however tested, shall endure." Alexander rose slowly, eyes lingering upon her, and allowed himself a small, rare smile, a subtle easing of the rigid mask he had maintained for society's sake. "Then let us begin," he said, "not as two hearts divided by circumstance, but as one family, united in what truly matters, each other and the life we have created together." The infant, as if sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, reached out with a tiny hand toward Alexander. The gesture was simple, yet profoundly symbolic, a silent recognition of bond, of belonging, and of the unbreakable connection between father, mother, and child. Alexander took the hand gently, feeling a surge of emotion so intense that it rendered him momentarily breathless. He looked to